Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his massive warship. The ship was called the UES Vengeance, and it was the newest and strongest ship in the human fleet. Jake had been in space for 20 years, fighting battles and keeping Earth safe from enemies. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, but everyone knew he was tough as steel when he needed to be. The morning started like any other day. Jake was drinking his coffee and reading reports from the outer colonies when something changed. The communication officer, a young woman named Sally Brooks, suddenly sat up straight in her chair. "Admiral, we are getting a strange signal," Sally said. Her voice was shaking a little. "It is coming from very far away, from outside human space." Jake walked over to Sally's station. On her screen, he could see lines of data flowing past. The signal was weak and broken, like someone was trying to talk through a bad phone connection. But there was something else about it that made Jake's skin crawl. The signal felt desperate, like whoever was sending it was dying. "Clean it up as much as you can," Jake told Sally. "I want to hear what they are saying." It took Sally and her team 3 hours to fix the signal. When they finally played it back, the whole bridge went quiet. The voice they heard was not human. It was high and musical, like a bird singing. But the words it spoke were full of terror. "Please, anyone who can hear this," the alien voice said. "We are the Zephyrians. We live in the Kepler 442 system. Something terrible has come to our space. They call themselves the Ravagers. They destroy everything. They eat planets and kill all life. 17 of our worlds are gone. Our fleets are destroyed. Our people are running for their lives." The message continued for several more minutes. The alien, who called himself Ambassador Krell, talked about machines that came from the deep space. These machines did not want to talk or make deals. They only wanted to consume and destroy. They had technology that was far beyond anything the Zephyrians had ever seen. "We have heard stories about you humans," Krell said near the end of his message. "Other species call your world Earth a death world. They say you are dangerous and violent. We always thought this was bad. But now we understand. Maybe only warriors from a death world can stop these monsters. Please help us. If you do not, we will all die." Jake felt a cold anger growing in his chest. He had spent his whole life protecting innocent people. It did not matter if they were human or alien. Nobody deserved to be hunted and killed by machines. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," Jake told Sally. "Priority 1. Within an hour, Jake was talking to President Alex Cooper. The president was a smart woman who had led Earth through many difficult times. She listened carefully as Jake played the alien message. "What do you think, Admiral?" President Cooper asked. "Can we trust these Zephyrians?" "I think they are telling the truth," Jake said. The fear in that alien's voice was real. "And if these Ravagers are as dangerous as he says, they will not stop with the Zephyrians. They will keep coming until they reach human space." President Cooper was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "How long would it take you to get to their system?" 3 weeks through hyperspace," Jake answered. "But I would need the whole Fifth Fleet. This is not a job for one ship." "You have it," the president said. "Take every ship you need. Show these Ravagers what happens when they threaten innocent people." Jake smiled. He had hoped she would say that. "Thank you, Madam President. We will not let you down." Over the next day, Jake watched his fleet gather. 12 huge battleships, 40 smaller destroyers, and dozens of support ships. Each ship was full of experienced fighters who had been born on Earth, the death world that had made them strong. Chief Engineer Ben Rodriguez came to see Jake before they left. Ben was a short, tough man who could fix anything. "Admiral, I have been working on our new weapons," Ben said. "The kinetic cannons can crack a planet in half." The plasma guns burn hotter than the center of a star. And we have those new temporal mines that can age an enemy ship to dust in seconds. Good, Jake said. We are going to need everything we have. Captain Lisa Hart, Jake's second in command, joined them on the bridge. Lisa was one of the best tactical officers in the fleet. She had studied every battle in human history and knew how to win fights against impossible odds. The crews are ready, Admiral, Lisa said. They all know what we are going up against. They are not scared. Jake looked out at the stars. Somewhere, out there, an entire species was dying. Innocent people were being hunted and killed by machines that felt nothing. But they had made one mistake. They had asked humans for help. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. Jake spoke into his communication system. We are going to jump to hyperspace in 10 minutes. We are going to save the Zephyrians. We are going to stop the Ravagers. We are going to show the galaxy why Earth is called a death world. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, carrying humanity's warriors toward their destiny. The Ravagers had never faced humans before. They were about to learn why that was a very bad thing for them. 3 weeks later, the human fleet came out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. What they saw made even the toughest soldiers feel sick. The space around them was full of dead ships and floating metal pieces. It looked like a giant graveyard of broken spacecraft. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on his bridge and stared at the destruction. Thousands of Zephyrian ships had been destroyed here. Some were military vessels, but many others were civilian transports. Families had been trying to escape when the Ravagers caught them. My God, whispered Captain Lisa Hart. She was looking at her tactical screen, which showed the damage in detail. How many people died here? Lieutenant Commander Kate Phillips was the fleet's intelligence officer. She was a smart woman who could figure out enemy plans by looking at small clues. Kate had been studying the wreckage for an hour, and her face was pale. At least 2 million Zephyrians died in this system, Kate said quietly. Maybe more. The Ravagers did not just destroy the ships. They harvested them. Look at these cut marks on the hull pieces. They took everything useful and left the rest to float in space. Jake felt anger burning in his chest. The Ravagers were not just killers. They were farmers and other species with their crops. Get me a scan of the inner system, he ordered. I want to know what we are dealing with. Commander Steve Baker was Jake's best scout. He was a thin, quiet man who could sneak his small ship anywhere without being seen. Steve took his stealth corvette toward the center of the system, while the main fleet hid behind a large asteroid. What Steve found was worse than anyone had imagined. The planet Zephyria Prime, home to 3 billion aliens, was being eaten alive. Huge machines hung in orbit around the world, sending down long tubes that sucked up everything on the surface. Cities, forests, mountains, oceans, everything was being consumed and turned into raw materials. Admiral, you need to see this. Steve's voice came over the radio. He sounded scared, which was unusual for him. Steve had been in dozens of battles and never showed fear. The images from Steve's ship appeared on the main screen. Jake and his officers watched in horror as the Ravager machines worked. The planet below looked like it was bleeding. Great wounds had been carved into the surface where the harvesting machines had torn away the land. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the Ravager fleet itself. Hundreds of ships floated in formation around the planet. Each ship was enormous, bigger than any vessel humans had ever built. They had strange geometric shapes that hurt to look at, as if they bent space around themselves. Out at the center of the fleet was something that made Jake's heart sink. It was a ship the size of a small moon, covered in weapons and armor. Sensors could barely understand what they were seeing. This had to be the command ship, the brain that controlled all the other Ravagers. How many ships are we looking at? Jake asked. Kate worked at her computer for several minutes before answering. I count 847 Ravager vessels, Admiral. They outnumber us almost 50 to 1. And each of their ships is larger and more heavily armed than anything in our fleet. The bridge was quiet for a long time. Everyone knew they were looking at an impossible fight. Any sane military commander would retreat and call for reinforcements. But Jake was not thinking about military tactics. He was thinking about the 3 billion Zephyrians who were being murdered while he watched. "Sir," said Captain Helen Carter, over the communication system. Helen commanded the assault carrier U.S. Predator, and she was one of the most aggressive officers in the fleet. "My pilots are ready to fight. Just give us the word." Jake smiled despite the terrible situation. This was why he loved serving with humans. They did not back down from a fight, even when they were outnumbered 50 to 1. Earth had made them tough, and they would rather die fighting than live knowing they had let innocent people be killed. "All senior officers, report to the Vengeance. For a war council," Jake announced, "we have a battle to plan." An hour later, Jake's conference room was full of his best commanders. They all looked grim as they studied the holographic display showing the Ravager fleet. The odds were terrible, but nobody was talking about retreat. "Traditional space combat will not work here," Jake said. "Their ships are too big and too numerous. We need to think like the predators we are. We need to be smart, fast, and vicious." Captain Helen Carter leaned forward. "What if we split our forces? Use the debris field for cover and hit them from multiple directions at once? Make them fight on our terms instead of theirs." "That could work," said Lisa Hart, "but we would need to cause maximum chaos. Make them confused and unable to coordinate their response." Dr. Amy Foster was the fleet's expert on alien technology. She had been studying pieces of Ravager ships that Steve had collected during his scouting mission. Amy was a quiet woman who usually stayed in her laboratory, but today she had important news. "I think I know how their fleet works," Amy said. "The Ravagers are not individuals like us. They are all connected to a central mind, probably located on that huge command ship. If we can destroy or damage that ship, the entire fleet will be confused and unable to fight effectively." Jake felt hope growing in his chest. How close would we need to get? "Very close," Amy admitted. "Close enough to hit their main computer core with our most powerful weapon. It would be a suicide mission for whoever tries it." Jake looked around the room at his officers. Every one of them was ready to volunteer for that suicide mission. This was what it meant to be human. When innocent people were in danger, humans would sacrifice everything to save them. "I will take the Vengeance on that mission," Jake said. Quietly, "the rest of the fleet will provide covering fire and cause as much chaos as possible. We get one chance at this. If we fail, the Ravagers will destroy us and then continue killing innocent people across the galaxy." Commander Steve Baker spoke up. "Admiral, I have been watching their defensive patterns. There is a 37-second window during their shield recharge cycle when the command ship is vulnerable. Miss that window, and we will never get another chance." Jake nodded. "Then we make sure we do not miss." He looked at each of his officers. "In turn, go back to your ships. Tell your crews what we are planning. Make sure they understand that we are not just fighting for the Zephyrians. We are fighting for every innocent person in the galaxy who cannot protect themselves." As his officers left to prepare their ships, Jake stood alone in the conference room, staring at the holographic display. The Ravager fleet looked invincible, but Jake knew something they did not. Humans were not like other species. They had been shaped by a death world that had taught them to fight or die. Tomorrow, the Ravagers would learn what that meant. The attack began at 4 in the morning, ship time. Captain Dan Murphy led the first wave in his destroyer squadron, coming out from behind a wrecked Zephyrian battleship with all weapons firing. His 5 ships moved like dancers, weaving between the massive Ravager vessels and hitting them where they were weakest. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the Vengeance as the battle unfolded on his tactical display. The human ships looked tiny compared to the Ravagers, like wolves, attacking a herd of elephants. But that was exactly what Jake wanted. Humans had learned to hunt big prey by being faster, smarter, and more vicious than their enemies. The Ravagers responded with overwhelming firepower. Their weapons were designed to destroy planets, and they turned that terrible power on the human fleet. Beams of energy that could melt mountains reached out across space, trying to catch the darting human ships. But the humans were not there when the beams arrived. They moved in patterns that seemed random, but were actually carefully planned. Captain Lisa Hart had studied how wolves hunted on Earth, and she had taught those same tactics to the fleet. Stay moving, hit the weak spots, never give the enemy a clear target. Direct hit on Ravager Vessel 77 Alpha, reported Lieutenant Sally Brooks from her communication station. Captain Murphy's squadron got through their shields. Jake nodded but did not smile. One damaged Ravager ship meant nothing when they were facing hundreds. The real battle was just beginning. Commander Ryan Webb was the chief engineer on the destroyer U.E.S. Lightning. His ship had taken a glancing blow from a Ravager beam weapon, and half his systems were offline. But Ryan and his team worked miracles, rerouting power and fixing damage while the battle raged around them. "Engine room to bridge," Ryan called over the communication system. His voice was calm despite the chaos. "We have restored 70% power. Weapons and shields are back online." "Outstanding work," replied Captain Murphy. "Now let us go. Find another Ravager to hurt." This was what made humans different from other species. When their ships were damaged, when their friends were dying, when the odds were impossible, they did not give up. They got angry. They fought harder. They found ways to win that other species thought were crazy. Captain Nicole Price commanded the heavy cruiser U.E.S. Retribution. She had been ordered to attack one of the Ravager processing stations that was harvesting the planet below. Her ship was outnumbered 10-1, but Nicole did not care about the odds. "All weapons, target the station's main support beam," Nicole ordered. "If we can bring that thing down, it will take 3 Ravager ships with it." The Retribution charged straight at the processing station, taking heavy fire from the defending Ravager ships. One beam weapon hit them directly, tearing a huge hole in the ship's armor. Nicole felt the deck shake under her feet as explosions rocked the ship. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, reported her damage control officer. "We are losing atmosphere." "Seal those sections and keep fighting," Nicole replied. "We are not backing down." This was the human way. They took damage that should have destroyed them, but they kept fighting. They lost friends and shipmates, but they never retreated. The Ravagers had never faced an enemy like this before. Admiral Morrison coordinated the entire battle from the Vengeance, watching as his ships danced through the enemy formation. The plan was working, but at a terrible cost. He had already lost 6 ships, good crews who had died fighting impossible odds. "Admiral, the Ravagers are starting to adapt to our tactics," Captain Hart reported. "They are repositioning their ships to limit our maneuverability." Jake had expected this. The Ravagers were machines, and machines could learn. But humans could adapt faster than any machine ever built. "Signal all ships. Execute Plan Gamma." Plan Gamma was even more aggressive than their original attack. Instead of avoiding the biggest Ravager ships, the humans would charge straight at them. It looked like suicide, but it was actually clever. The huge Ravager vessels could not turn quickly enough to track the small, fast human ships. Lieutenant Commander Kate Phillips was coordinating intelligence from her station on the Vengeance. She had been studying the Ravager fleet's behavior, looking for patterns and weaknesses. What she found gave her hope. "Admiral, I think the Ravagers are starting to get confused," Kate said. "Their formation is becoming less organized. Some ships are firing on empty space where our ships used to be." This was exactly what Jake had hoped for. The Ravagers were used to fighting enemies who followed predictable patterns. Humans did not fight like that. They were chaos and violence. Wrapped in metal and steel, Captain Helen Carter led her fighter squadrons in a series of attacks that looked completely insane. Her pilots flew through weapons fire that could have destroyed planets, their small craft spinning and diving through the enemy formation. When Fighter Squadron 7 lost their leader to a Ravager beam, Lieutenant Paul Young took command without being asked. "Squadron 7, follow me," Paul called over the radio. "We are going to show these machines what humans can do." The fighters attacked the Ravager command ship directly, their tiny weapons doing almost no damage, but forcing the huge vessel to defend itself. This was part of Jake's plan. Every weapon the command ship used against the fighters was one less weapon shooting at the bigger human ships. The battle raged for 6 hours. Human ships were damaged and destroyed, but they never stopped fighting. For every ship they lost, they took 3 Ravager vessels with them. The aliens who were watching from their hiding places had never seen anything like it. Ambassador Krell, the Zephyrian who had sent the original Plea for help, watched the battle from a hidden observation post. He could not believe what he was seeing. The humans were outnumbered 50-1, but they were winning. Their ships moved like living things, striking and disappearing before the Ravagers could respond. "How are they doing this?" Krell asked his military advisor, General Thrix. "I do not know," Thrix replied. "They fight like they are already dead and have nothing left to lose." It is magnificent and terrifying at the same time. On the Vengeance, Jake was preparing for the final phase of his plan. The Ravager fleet was confused and damaged, but they were still dangerous. The command ship was still functioning, still coordinating the enemy response. It was time to take the biggest risk of all. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," Jake announced over the fleet communication system. "Phase 3 begins now. All vessels except the Vengeance will provide covering fire. We are going to end this." Lieutenant Sam White was a young navigation officer who had found the weakness in the command ship's defenses. He looked up from his station with nervous excitement. "Admiral, the next shield recharge cycle begins in 4 minutes. You will have exactly 37 seconds to make the shot." Jake smiled grimly. "Then we better not miss." He turned to his weapons officer. "Load the temporal disruption torpedo. This is what we came here to do." The Vengeance turned toward the Ravager command ship, accelerating to full speed. Around them, the rest of the human fleet concentrated their fire, trying to clear a path through the enemy formation. The final gamble was about to begin. The final assault began with every remaining human ship firing at once. Captain Lisa Hart coordinated the attack from her tactical station, her fingers dancing across the controls as she directed the firepower of the entire fleet. Moving at incredible speeds, hammered the Ravager command ship's shields, while plasma beams carved through the smaller escort vessels like they were made of paper. Admiral Jake Morrison stood calmly on the bridge of the Vengeance as his ship charged toward the massive enemy vessel. Around him, his crew worked with deadly precision, even as explosions rocked the ship and alarms blared throughout the corridors. They had trained for this moment their entire careers. "Direct hit on the starboard shield generator," reported weapons. "Officer Tony Garcia, their defensive screen is weakening." The Ravagers were not stupid. They quickly realized that the Vengeance posed the greatest threat, and they focused all their firepower on the approaching human dreadnought. The space around Jake's ship became a nightmare of energy beams and missile explosions. The whole armor glowed red-hot from the constant bombardment. Chief Engineer Ben Rodriguez worked miracles in the engine room, keeping the ship's power systems running, despite damage that should have caused a complete failure. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the deck plates shook with each hit, but Ben and his team never stopped working. Engineering to bridge, Ben called over the communication system. His voice was steady despite the chaos around him. I have rerouted power from life support to the shields. We can take a few more hits, but not many. Jake nodded grimly. Just keep us flying for 3 more minutes, Ben. That is all we need. The bridge crew was taking casualties. A Ravager beam had punched through the forward armor and injured several officers. Lieutenant Sally Brooks had a cut on her forehead from flying metal, but she stayed at her communication station, coordinating with the other ships in the fleet. Admiral, Captain Carter's fighters are taking heavy losses, Sally reported. She is asking if they should pull back. Tell her negative, Jake replied. We need every second of distraction they can give us. Captain Helen Carter and her surviving. Pilots were performing maneuvers that seemed to defy the laws of physics. They flew through weapons fire that could have destroyed small moons, their fighters twisting and spinning between the massive Ravager ships. When Lieutenant Paul Young's fighter was hit by a beam weapon, he stayed in formation even as his ship burned around him. Squadron 7, this is Young, Paul called over the radio. His voice was calm despite his desperate situation. My bird is dying, but I can still fly. Going to ram the nearest weapon emplacement. Make it count. Paul's fighter slammed into a Ravager gun turret and a ball of fire and metal. His sacrifice cleared the way for the other fighters to attack the command. Ship's sensor array. Every human pilot understood that they were probably going to die, but they kept fighting anyway. The Vengeance was taking damage that should have destroyed any normal ship. Half the bridge crew was injured. Systems were failing throughout the vessel, and fires burned in 3 different sections. But the ship kept moving toward its target, driven by the determination of its crew. Shield strength down to 15%, reported Chief Security Officer Maria Santos. She had taken over the tactical station when the original officer was wounded. 1 more direct hit and we are finished. Jake looked at the tactical display. They were almost close enough to use their secret weapon, but the Ravager command ship shields were still active. Everything depended on the timing that Lieutenant Sam White had calculated. Sam, how long until the shield recharge cycle? Jake asked. Sam White was the youngest officer on the bridge, barely 22 years old, but he had studied the enemy ship's defensive patterns for hours, and he knew he was right about the weakness. 30 seconds, Admiral. The gap will last for exactly 37 seconds. Then their shields will be stronger than ever. The seconds crawled by like hours. The Vengeance continued to take punishment from the Ravager fleet, but Ben Rodriguez somehow kept the engines running. Around them, the other human ships fought desperately to keep the escort vessels away from the flagship Captain Nicole Price's ship. The Retribution was barely holding together. Half her crew was dead or wounded, and her ship looked like it had been through a metal shredder. But Nicole kept fighting, using her damaged vessel to shield the Vengeance from enemy fire. This is Price, she called over the radio. My ship is finished, but we can still fight for a few more minutes. Make this count, Admiral. Jake felt tears in his eyes as he watched good people sacrifice everything for the mission. This was what it meant to be human. When the innocent needed protection, humans would give their lives without hesitation. Shield gap opening now, Sam announced. You have 37 seconds. Jake turned to his weapons officer. Fire the temporal disruption torpedo. Full spread. The torpedo launched from the Vengeance in a burst of exotic energy. It was an experimental weapon that humanity barely understood, built from technology they had discovered in ancient alien ruins. The warhead contained compressed time itself, ready to unleash entropy on whatever it hit. For a moment that seemed to last forever, nothing happened. The torpedo flew through space toward the gap in the Ravager command ship's shields. Jake held his breath, knowing that everything depended on this one shot. And reality twisted around the Ravager command ship. A temporal field from the torpedo surrounded the massive vessel, accelerating its local time stream by millions of years in just a few seconds. The ship's hull began to age and crumble as entropy claimed its victory. The effect was immediate and devastating. Metal that had been strong and new suddenly became old and weak. Systems that had operated for thousands of years failed all at once. In less than a minute, the mighty command ship crumbled into dust and debris. The ripple effect spread through the Ravager fleet instantly. Ships that had been maneuvering with deadly precision suddenly began to drift aimlessly. Weapons that had been firing with mechanical accuracy fell silent. The artificial intelligence that had controlled the entire invasion was gone, leaving behind only empty metal shells. Commander Steve Baker, who had been watching from his scout ship, could not believe what he was seeing. Admiral, the entire Ravager fleet has gone dark. They are not responding to any commands. I think you killed their hive mind. Jake felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion wash over him. The plan had worked, but at a terrible cost. He looked around his damaged bridge at his wounded crew, knowing that similar scenes were playing out on every ship in his fleet. Good people had died to make this victory possible. All ships. This is Admiral Morrison, Jake announced over the fleet communication system. The Ravager command ship has been destroyed. Their fleet is disabled. We have won. The cheers that came back over the radio were mixed with tears. The human fleet had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, but everyone knew what it had cost them. Heroes had died today, and their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Dr. Amy Foster confirmed what the sensors were showing. The Ravager ships are completely inactive, Admiral. Whatever intelligence was controlling them is gone. They are just floating metal now. Jake nodded and slumped into his command chair. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. They had to secure the system, help the surviving Zephyrians, and somehow find a way to honor the memory of everyone who had died in this fight. The humans from the Deathworld had proven, once again, that they would fight impossible odds to protect the innocent. The galaxy would never forget what had happened here today. 3 days after the great battle, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the medical bay of the Vengeance, looking at the long rows of injured crew members. Dr. Patricia Chun, the ship's chief medical officer, moved between the beds with quiet efficiency. Her face was tired, but determined as she worked to save everyone she could. How many did we lose? Jake asked quietly. Dr. Chun paused in her work and turned to face him. Her eyes were red from exhaustion and grief. Across the entire fleet, we lost 847 people. Another 1,200 are wounded. The Retribution lost half her crew. Captain Price is alive, but she will never walk again. Jake felt the weight of every death like a stone in his chest. These were good people who had followed him into battle against impossible odds. They had trusted him with their lives, and too many of them were never going home. They knew the risks, Dr. Chun said gently, seeing the pain in his eyes. Every person in this fleet volunteered to be here. They died protecting innocent people. There is honor in that. Jake nodded but could not speak. He walked slowly through the medical bay, stopping at each bed to talk with the wounded. These men and women had given everything for strangers they had never met. It was the most human thing imaginable. Lieutenant Sam White was in one of the beds, his left arm in a cast. The young navigation officer had been injured when a console exploded during the final attack, but he was smiling when Jake approached. "Admiral, did we really do it?" Sam asked. "Did we stop the Ravagers?" "We did," Jake replied. "Your calculations were perfect. That 37-second window saved the entire galaxy." Sam's smile grew wider. "My parents always said I was good at math. They never imagined it would be used to fight monsters." Jake spent 2 hours in the medical bay, talking with each of the wounded crew members. They all asked the same question in different ways. Had their sacrifice meant something? Jake assured each of them that it had. The Zephyrians were free, and the Ravager threat was ended forever. Ambassador Krell arrived at the human fleet on the 4th day after the battle. The tall, bird-like alien moved carefully through the damaged corridors of the Vengeance, accompanied by a delegation from his government. His feathers, which had been dull with fear in his original message, now shone with renewed hope. Jake met the delegation in the ship's main conference room. The room showed the effects of the battle, with scorch marks on the walls and temporary repairs holding some systems together. But Jake stood straight and proud as he welcomed the aliens aboard his ship. "Admiral Morrison," Krell said, his musical voice filled with emotion, "I do not have words to express our gratitude. When we called for help, we hoped for aid. We never expected anyone to sacrifice so much for strangers." "That is what humans do," Jake replied simply. "We protect those who cannot protect themselves." Krell gestured to one of his companions, a smaller Zephyrian who carried a metal case. "We have brought something for you and your crew. It is not much compared to what you have given us, but it comes from our hearts." The case contained medals made from Zephyrian crystal, each one carved with symbols that meant protector and hero in their language. There was one medal for every human who had participated in the battle, including those who had died. "We want the families of your fallen to know that their loved ones will never be forgotten," Krell said. "We are creating a memorial on our homeworld. Every Zephyrian child will learn their names and their sacrifice." Jake accepted the medals with a heavy heart. He knew that no amount of recognition could bring back the dead, but it meant something that the Zephyrians understood the price that had been paid for their freedom. The work of cleaning up after the battle took several weeks. Human engineering teams worked alongside Zephyrian technicians to dismantle the Ravager, processing stations, and repair the damage to the planet below. Lieutenant Commander Kate Phillips coordinated the effort, her intelligence skills proving useful for understanding the alien technology. Chief Engineer Ben Rodriguez led the effort to study the disabled Ravager ships. What they found was both fascinating and terrifying. The machines had been built by an ancient civilization that had died out millions of years ago, leaving behind only their mechanical servants. "The good news is that there are no more of them," Ben reported to Jake. "The bad news is that their technology is so advanced we can barely understand it. These machines were designed to be perfect killers." Jake was not interested in studying the Ravager technology. He ordered all of their ships to be destroyed rather than risk them ever being reactivated. Some of his officers disagreed, thinking the technology could be useful, but Jake was firm. "We did not come here to become conquerors," he told them. "We came here to protect the innocent. These machines represent nothing but death and destruction." The news of the human victory spread across the galaxy within weeks. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive barbarians suddenly began to see them in a new light. The humans from the Deathworld had done something no other race had ever accomplished. They had faced an unstoppable enemy and won. President Alex Cooper addressed the returning fleet from Earth's orbital station. Her speech was broadcast across human space and to dozens of allied worlds. Jake watched from the bridge of the Vengeance as Earth grew larger in the view screen. "Today we celebrate heroes," President Cooper said. "The men and women of the Fifth Fleet faced impossible odds to protect innocent people they had never met. They showed the galaxy what it means to be human. They proved that strength comes not from weapons or technology, but from the willingness to sacrifice for others. Jake felt pride mixed with sadness as he listened to the president's words. They had won a great victory, but the cost had been terrible. Every ship in the fleet carried empty spaces where good people used to be. The homecoming celebration was bittersweet. Crowds cheered as the surviving ships entered Earth's atmosphere, but there were also tears for those who had not returned. Jake participated in the ceremonies because it was his duty, but his heart was heavy with the memory of the fallen. A month after returning to Earth, Jake announced his retirement from the fleet. He had served for 30 years, fighting battles across human space, but the weight of command had finally become too much to bear. He wanted to go home to his family farm in Montana and try to find peace. The government offered him medals and parades, but Jake declined them all. He had done what needed to be done, nothing more. The real heroes were the people who had died in the battle, and they would never receive the recognition they deserved. On his last day as admiral, Jake visited the memorial wall in fleet headquarters. The names of every person killed in the Zephyrian system were carved into black stone, along with the words, "They gave everything so others might live." Jake stood there for an hour, reading each name and remembering the faces that went with them. Captain Lisa Hart found him there as the sun was setting. She had been promoted to admiral and would take command of the Fifth Fleet. Lisa was a good officer and a better person, and Jake knew the fleet would be in capable hands. Any regrets? Lisa asked as they stood together in the fading light. Thought about the question for a long time before answering. I regret that good people had to die, but I do not regret what we did. The Zephyrians are free because of our sacrifice. Sometimes that has to be enough. The Zephyrians kept their promise about the memorial. They built a beautiful monument in the capital city of their homeworld, with the names of all the human dead, carved in both English and Zephyrian script. At the base of the monument, they placed a simple inscription. They came from the Deathworld when we called, and they gave everything so we might live. Every year on the anniversary of the battle, Zephyrian children place flowers at the memorial and sing songs about the brave humans who saved their world. They learn the names of heroes like Lieutenant Paul Young, who crashed his fighter into a Ravager gun turret, and Captain Nicole Price, who used her dying ship to shield others from enemy fire. The political effects of the victory rippled across the galaxy for years. Species that had once looked down on humanity as violent primitives now sought them as allies and protectors. The humans from Earth had proven that sometimes the best defense of civilization came from those who understood violence well enough to use it righteously. New recruits flocked to join the human fleet, inspired by the stories of the Fifth Fleet's heroism. Young men and women who had heard about the battle against the Ravagers wanted to serve aboard the ships that had faced impossible odds and won. They understood that being human meant more than just living on a death world. It meant being willing to stand between the darkness and those who could not protect themselves. Jake Morrison retired to his family farm in the mountains of Montana, far from the stars and the battles he had fought. He raised cattle and grew wheat, finding peace in Hanavite, the simple work of farming. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind blew across the prairie, he thought he could hear voices carried on the breeze, the voices of crews who had followed him into the void and never returned home. Visitors sometimes came to see him, reporters, who wanted to write stories about the hero who had defeated the Ravagers. Jake always turned them away politely. He was not a hero, he told them. He was just a S,